Welcome to the Parking Lot Powers podcast, where we lift the hood on the powers, politics, privileges, and the prickly aspects of private school life. Welcome to the Parking Lot Powers podcast. My name is Nenhlanhla, and today I want to be able to explore what may be considered the prickly aspect of cell phones. So, we are at that point in time that it's almost as if the conversation around cell phone access with our eldest one is kind of creeping in. Not many of his friends, or let's say even the people, or let's say friends that are in his grades, have phones, but increasingly there is that number, like a ticking up of friends that have cell phones. And so the research, I think a lot of us in this class invest quite a lot in parenting, whether it be podcasts, whether it be material. So the research is telling us that kids should not be having phones before the age of 16. But as I'm saying, the reality is that a lot of them, our eldest is now 10 going on 11. Some of them already have phones, and actually some of them have already had them for quite some time, let's say about 2 years or so. If we're now going to be struggling the reality of increasingly the kids having phones, and certainly by the time that they start the first year of high school, which is grade 8, and I think they're about maybe 13, 14 at that age, a large number of them. It's just like I think the common thing that a lot of them will definitely have a phone by that age. But what does it really mean? Because we know now that the children having access to phones definitely has its underbellies, and it can be anything from cyberbullying, lack of sleep, and all sorts of other things. And so we now know that also, while we may try and actually delay that as best as we can, as certain parents, that there is a legitimacy in kids that don't have phones being socially isolated. So why am I actually raising this? So I've already touched on the fact that some of his friends have got phones, but the bigger kind of background is that because of, let's say, COVID coming through, all of them have got iPads. And so they've got these groups that they've actually established through their iPads. And last year, we had an incident where, yes, they've got these groups with their friends, and I think largely we let them have those groups and we probably don't monitor them. And we have certainly had those conversations around, hey, Thabiso, this is how we engage in this forum. We don't engage in vulgar language and all sorts of other kind of principles and values that we've already, and actually boundaries that we've already set out. These are let's say, it even goes on to apps. These are the apps that you're allowed to be able to have access to, and these are the ones that you're not. So what then happens last year is that it's bedtime, hand over the iPad. And I don't know, I can't recall what actually led me in this instance to be able to say, hey, let me just pop into the group. And I see in the group that there is a boy here, and there's no other way. If you are Zulu speaking, you'll understand this. Like, he was basically ebebhala intlamba, and the easiest translation for that, he was basically writing very vulgar and profane language. And I think, with the English language, we've somehow kind of become desensitized when people just like use swear words. But I think I was even surprised that there's a child, and that is their peer, that can be able to write like vulgar language in isiZulu. And so I then quickly just jump into the group and I say, hey, this is me, I'm a parent here, and this is unacceptable. And boy, what happens is that they all scurry like cats, scattering, leaving the group, right? And one friend who I think he's like an administrator, I don't know, he then side messages Thabiso and is like, hi, like, your mom is in the group, like, how can you let that be, and all of that. And I respond to him, I was like, mom is still here, your friend is in bed, I still stand by the fact that this was unacceptable. And what then happens after that is that they basically establish another group, and he's not part of that group because he's not the cool kid in the block on the block, because his mom has access to his messages. And because of that, I then felt inspired to be able to say, I wanted to reach out to the parents to be able to say, hey, moms, I've just come across this. Can we just have a powwow and basically have a social compact to be able to say, we're going to have a conversation with our boys about the do's and don'ts and the general kind of social compact around engaging on whether it be groups like the friendship groups or anything that is like related to how they engage on their mobile phones. And speaking to a parent who has had much more tenure than me, she's got older kids, I respect her about this. She was just like, Sneh, don't even do it. And she was like, I don't think that moms are generally open when we try and facilitate such conversations, and you may have egg on your face. And that for me was kind of very telling, because here we are, and I keep on going back to this, that we come together in this kind of schooling environment, and our kids don't really have another kind of legitimate platform or arena to be able to form legitimate friendships outside of the schooling environment. And yet we don't really know each other. We are friendly with each other at best. And sometimes we can be able to form friendships amongst ourselves. But having said that, are we really prepared to actually co-parent with each other, where we're discussing our values, our principles, our morals, and what that looks like in practical terms? Because never has there been a period in time where we really need to be able to be intentional and actually tease and test what it means to be able to say that these are what our values are as parents, and we actually need to be able to negotiate that together. So, and I think when I then stepped back, I was like, oh my goodness, because we're not willing to be able to just have these difficult conversations, I'm not sure whether we can legitimately just then be able to talk about community and belonging in a legitimate manner if we're not actually then able to step with truth and authenticity in being able to facilitate these conversations with each other. And it also, for me, does lend itself to another experience that we've recently had, and that was Thabiso, his friend, basically searching for porn in one of his devices. And I'm talking about it being Thabiso's devices, and thank the Lord that was actually found by our helper, and she's quite discerning. But again, this is a friend that is through the schooling community, and having gone through the experience of last year and also trying to facilitate a conversation and being counseled not to, I'm actually at a point of where it's like, I'm not sure how to be able to just like take this forward. And I think the reason why I raise this is that when we engage with, let's say, parenting podcasts, they will tell you that your kids are going to be exposed to porn. And in this instance, thank God, it wasn't exposure. It was just the friend searching for porn, which we later found out. But we never really think about like what is the environment within which that they would come across porn, and who they would actually come across or be exposed to porn with. And so this is also then another opportunity, I think, for us to be able to truly interrogate within ourselves when we talk about such prickly aspects, or let's say they prickly in our own kind of homes, in terms of just saying we are on guard in terms of them being exposed to this, and actually just then saying that come to me if you're ever exposed to this. But we are not really counseled in terms of, if this happens with a friend, and that friend happens to be somebody that who's not necessarily your friend, and so we haven't even established the parameters of like facilitating co-parenting with each other, what that truly means. And so that's why I just thought, let me just like come here, and this is like a worthwhile conversation for us to be able to have. So in some of the parenting podcasts that I've come across, they will then say that when, your child is, let's say, desiring a phone, that's the most power you've got as a parent. That's the time to be able to negotiate the parameters and boundaries of what it means for them to have a phone, counsel them, and also talk intentionally about the responsibility of having a phone. And I think with that, again, what we don't put to the foreground is that when your child is actually requesting a phone, and we are trying to be able to negotiate all these values and boundaries, it's within the context of a community, because he's not going to be able to have a phone by himself. It's with his friends. And as we've already established, that friendship is within the context of the friendships that he has within the schooling environment. And so I, at this point in time, would like to be able to explore, have you, if your child has a phone, have you actually entered into a formal contract with them? Did you discuss what are the boundaries and just general rules of that? And if you did that, did you also discuss with their kind of broader parent circle that you then share, let's say their friends, moms, or whatever may be, or guardians, what your values, principles, and standpoints are for your child, and therefore how does that fit in line with, let's say, your kids' friends, for instance. And it comes back to what I want to be able to explore within our podcast. And I emphasize that because this is where I'm trying to facilitate a community in terms of how do we talk about the issues that are pressing and bring them to the fore, because we seem to be unable to actually do that within the real face-to-face interface or context within our schools. And so, have you had those conversations? What do you believe are the enablers to be able to have a successful conversation? And what are the barriers? Because we come from different backgrounds and values, and we're not able to actually tease themselves out. I've found that even if you are having a tactical conversation with somebody, it can still go sideways, because we don't know what our triggers are, or let's say the triggers of the other person. And you may really be trying to engage in a manner that is respectful, in a manner that you just saying, these are kids and we want to be able to just make sure that we are facilitating what is in the best interest for them and therefore the broader community. But if we haven't established those foundational principles of engagement, a person may still feel attacked or triggered somehow, and they may be able to recall. And the danger of us not being able to have the platform to be able to address these things is that it can be able to resort to gossip and slander. And let us be frank with each other. Nobody is empowered, or let's say are the custodians of gossip and slander quite like women. And I think that is, let's say, maybe something we can be able to explore in a different episode. But for the purposes of today, I just want to be able to say I'm bringing this forward because it's been a personal experience on our side, and with the best intentions of trying to be able to facilitate a communal conversation just within the small circle, was ours counseled, do not do it. And yes, sure enough, I've had that odd conversation with just like, let's say, one or two parents, but I do believe that it deserves a wider conversation, a wider facilitation. And I know that we typically confer to the school to be able to facilitate the difficult, or let's say prickly aspect that may rear its head within parenting. But I do believe that, we are afforded the opportunity to be able to facilitate and have these conversations within ourselves, within just like the parent community. But what will it really take? So I'm inviting you to be able to just like comment and just like share with me and the broader community what has been the best practice, what has worked, what hasn't worked when you've tried to be able to facilitate this conversation. And do you believe that it is even possible for us to be able to have these conversations?